Ah, the National Association of Independent Schools. Or NAIS. It's been a while since I've taken a look at these guys. So, what is the topic for today? Expanding affinity potential. Affinity groups in elementary, middle, and early childhood education. Affinity groups, huh? Now, where have I heard that term recently?
I have found that this kind of learning is best done in affinity group spaces. And what I mean by that, and what I'm proposing to you all tonight, or this afternoon, is that most DEI should be done in racially segregated groups. And I know that's going to make some people in this room very uncomfortable, so hear me out.
Yes, affinity groups. Got it.
You think about affinity as a gathering together of people who share a common identity and can speak from the I perspective. So anytime that could be around race, that could be around gender, but people who have a similar common identity.
A gathering together of people who share a common identity, race or gender. All right, well, race is not an identity unless you're a racist, and gender is not an identity unless you're a sexist. And it's difficult to accept the word gathering when you are, in fact, dividing.
And what we find is that really gives people an opportunity to really affirm their identity and feel some sense of pride in that.
I cannot affirm my skin color until I've been portioned off with others who have a similar skin color. I cannot affirm my gender until I've been portioned off with others of my gender. So, in the absence of this benevolent categorization, I have little opportunity in life to be aware of these elements of my bodily makeup. Got it.
And when people feel pride and when they feel comfortable in their communities, they're more likely to be successful in them.
So the goal is to impart upon K through 12 students a sense of pride. Pride in one's race. Pride in one's gender. Got it.
But not just for older students, but these groups can begin as young as early childhood. Really, the importance of having an opportunity for people to gather together around a shared affinity really is good for all students.
Oh, certainly. The earlier you can begin conditioning children to assess themselves and other people on the basis of sex and skin color, the better for all of us. What are some of the challenges schools face creating and sustaining affinity groups? Yes, please do tell us of the obstacles inherent to instituting racial and gender segregation into an independent school. I am dying to find out.
One of the challenges for adults is sometimes their unwillingness or hesitancy to be able to facilitate these groups and wondering what questions will come up from children and how they can honestly be able to answer those questions.
Oh, so when little Jimmy in the back corner raises his hand and says, "Mrs. Ansem, why can't I play with the other kids?" And then you have to tell little Jimmy it's because he's the only skin color of his kind in the class? Those sorts of questions?
We actually know that the literature, the psychology supports it, that kids can identify racial differences from a very young age. And so it's important to start talking about that and helping students make sense of it, because in the absence of us adults helping them, they come to their own conclusions, which may or may not be based in fact.
Well, here, let me help you out on that one. When a kid asks, "Why do we have different skin colors?" you say, "The same reason we have different eye colors and hair colors. Why some people are tall and others shorter. It's just how we're born, and we're all the same in that we're all different like that. What matters is what you do, how you treat yourself, and how you treat others. What you look like doesn't really matter at the end of the day." I mean, I don't know. It doesn't sound all that complicated to me until you get into basic biology class and you start teaching about the mechanics of DNA. But maybe I'm just an idealist.
Sometimes one of the challenges that people think about is the critical mass or the lack thereof. At a given school, there may not be tons of students of color, for example.
Yes, Jimmy is sitting alone because you've elevated skin color to a deciding factor in socialization. Please, go on.
And there has been some pushback from various institutions around, well, if we don't have multiple students of color, then why do we need those groups? And it's actually the reverse.
Really? A low number of any one skin color is the reason why you need to enact racial segregation? Do tell.
The reason that we need these groups is because we have such few numbers of students of color, and they need to be in those spaces where they can truly understand that their experiences are not only their own, that they are being experienced by peers and they're not alone in their schools, even though sometimes they may feel that way.
So, let me just see if I understand this. You engineer a situation where kids are going to be divvied up on the basis of race, a situation where kids are going to be reduced down to something they have no control over, so that those in the minority can then have the shared experience of isolation and discrimination that you have implemented in order that they don't feel alone. You couldn't just treat race and gender as an irrelevancy. No, you have to create a value out of skin color and genitals for the children's own good. Got it.
And when they're together that way, I think it does give them that experience of being in the majority in a way that they don't experience throughout the rest of their school day.
The majority? You partition kids off into racial groups so they can, what? Feel like rulers of their own segregated kingdoms away from the other kids? Are you even listening to yourself right now?
I think one of the biggest challenges that schools face, particularly when we're talking about race-based affinity work, is the idea of the majority culture in the schools, which are predominantly white in the independent school worlds in which we are working, kind of trying to figure out where they fit in affinity spaces.
Figuring out where they fit. Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. If you're one skin color, you go to the right. And if you're the other skin color, you go to the left. It really is as simple as that, isn't it?
And it's really important for that work to be done by everyone. So not only folks who may be underrepresented in their communities, I think it just helps the larger community conversations flow and there's better understanding.
Okay, I have no idea if it is the fault of bad editing or the blatant cognitive dissonance of our speaker, but none of that last bit made any sense. What do affinity groups look like at different developmental stages? Well, I assume they look like racial and sexual segregation, just with increasingly taller kids from one grade to the next. Or am I missing something?
It's really important for children to start understanding their mutual identities at really young ages. They already have some sort of understanding about who they are as people and the differences that they see in themselves and their peers. Any one child could fit into multiple different affinity spaces and have to make some decisions around what group do I want to be in.
What group do they want to be in? So the black kid can join the white group and the girl can join the boy group? So then, what's the point of having affinity groups in the first place? And honestly, that really is the most important question here. Why?
So if you start at really young ages with helping children hone in and understand their identities and then move that work to when you get to lower elementary, like starting with second or third grade, really formally having children in those affinity groups once they've done all of the self-identification pieces in the lower grades.
Oh, so it is the young, impressionable children who will be deciding for themselves how best to portion themselves off from the other kids based on non-determinative, arbitrary characteristics. a process of self and societal assessment that you, as teachers, have only gently shunted them towards from kindergarten into the higher grades. Got it.
And then I'd add by the time they are in the middle school ages, so 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, it really aligns nicely with their developmental stages anyway. And this is a time when typically students are really questioning, who am I in comparison to you? Who am I in comparison to the space that I'm in? Who am I compared to the world that I live in?
But you've just assured that question of who a kid is pales and is in fact irrelevant next to what they are. I mean, you already knew what their identity was the first time you looked at them, didn't you? And you separated them accordingly. What's all this self-discovery stuff you're talking about?
And so it really, if starting at a young age with affinity groups and conversations around identity, the students are just much more well-equipped by middle school. As we know, middle school is a trying time for kids no matter what's happening, but if you think about the intersectionality of race or gender or sexual orientation, when they're grappling with all of those things, if they've had a base in the early elementary years to talk about it and to think about it, it just sets them up nicely for continued success in kind of that middle school age group.
Are you sure? Are you certain that teaching kids, beginning in kindergarten, to value themselves and others on the basis of race or gender is going to help them develop into having a healthy self-image? That it will prepare them to deal with the trials and tribulations of maturity? Or will you have instilled in them a fatalistic sense that they are forever defined and bound by things over which they and everyone else has no control?
And I'd say at different developmental stages, when children are younger, I think it might be a little bit more adult-led, the importance of an adult facilitator, ideally one who shares that identity and affinity with those students.
Yes.
Oh, well, of course.
Of course!
I mean, we couldn't have a black teacher overseeing Asian students now, could we? Racial mixing needs to be avoided when at all possible in education.
Is really important in guiding and directing the conversation. And as students get older, I think it's important that they then take on some more ownership and leading those conversations and talking about what type of issues they're dealing with as it relates to their identity and having a little bit more, again, ownership of that process.
Yes. Hopefully we can train these children to take these lessons forward and spread the good word that like should only ever associate with like. How very progressive. How does a school initiate the process of starting affinity groups? Yes, please do tell us of the first steps one must take in turning back the clock on over 50 years of civil rights advancements. I am all ears.
I think one of the first steps when thinking about creating affinity group spaces is really having buy-in from the constituencies within your community. So that would be the faculty, the parents, the students themselves.
I would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversations they have with parents, selling them on the idea of splitting their kids off from the rest of the class because their skin color does not match the majority. I am sure it would be thrilling.
And then you need the administrative and the institutional support to sustain a program. So I think that the first is education.
It seems to be that education of any kind is entirely absent from this process. Rather, indoctrination seems to be the word of the day.
For all of those constituencies about what are affinity group spaces, why for our school community is this something important that we value. And I would add with the parent piece is also the board of trustees really needs to be on board in order to make this work.
Yes. The blame for this madness needs to be spread around as far and as high up as possible so that we can better convince ourselves that we're justified in doing this, as well as roping in the shields of our institutions for any potential societal backlash or legal liability. Got it.
there will be some pushback. There will be people who have questions. And so knowing that your leadership is ready to help answer those questions and support this initiative will make it that much more successful.
Yeah, I mean, so long as you have the stamp of approval from someone above your pay grade, teaching children to be happy little racists can be an absolutely enriching and liberating experience for everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go outside and look up into the sky in wonderment. A wonderment fueled by an insidious misery at how 3 grown adults, responsible for the educational development of children, just happily tried to sell me on galvanizing some of the worst parts of human social behavior as valuable tools for personal growth. But hey, what do I know? I mean, I am in a pretty big affinity group. As always, thank you for watching.